He's the host of the Michael Knowles Show with the Daily Wire and co-host The Verdict with Ted Cruz on a podcast. Michael Knowles, great to get you back in the chair. A couple of days till the election. You know, it looks like there could be over 100 million people who have voted early. It's going to be big numbers final. But what does that mean? Does that mean we're going to kind of have an idea who wins election night? Your thoughts?
I don't think we're going to know who wins necessarily on election night, unless there's a big upset in, Florida or, I don't know, Texas or somebody like some eccentric left-wing prognosticators.
Trump wins New York.
If that goes the wrong way. Trump wins New York. Trump wins California. But barring something like that, I don't think we're going to know on election night. What it also means, though, is that "can I change my vote" is going to keep trending on Google, because even back when there had been 65 million votes cast, that had become a big trend. And in certain states, you actually can change your vote, though it's such a hassle. I suspect a lot of people won't do it. Raises a lot of questions about early voting, universal unsolicited mail-in. But this is certainly the strangest election in my lifetime. And I think as a result, there is no way that those armies of lawyers that the campaigns have are going to let this thing go on election night, barring some big flip of a state.
No doubt, especially with Pennsylvania and North Carolina looking like they may go well past the November 3rd deadline, artificial deadline. You know, I read this story this week. It kind of blows me away. People in businesses in D.C., in Philadelphia, even Rodeo Drive, are already starting to board up their windows in anticipation of, what are they, peaceful protests they expect on election night, in anticipation of violence on election night.
Of course, and I think they should absolutely board up their shops. I mean, we've seen the violence now for, 6 or 7 months already. It is political violence. It rarely has anything to do with any particular action or any particular question of justice. It is simply political. And I know a lot of people are saying right now that after the election, if Joe Biden wins, things are going to go back to normal. That's basically been the pitch of the Biden campaign, that we can't take 4 more years of this. I am not so certain about that. I am skeptical that Democratic politicians are going to give up the lockdown power that they have taken, specifically with coronavirus. And I'm not convinced that it's going to bring down the tenor of the country. The left is already talking about adding 2 new states, D.C. and Puerto Rico. They're already talking about packing the Supreme Court. They're already talking about abolishing the Electoral College. We're talking about major changes here. I think that the past 4 years have been very difficult for the progressives and the leftists who are very offended by President Trump. And frankly, I think they're out for vengeance.
You know, Michael, I guess it's common wisdom or common thought that if Donald Trump does prevail in the election, that there will be rioting and looting and everything going on, violence in the streets. What happens if Biden wins? Will the conservatives tear up the joint?
You know, I think we're a little more laid back than all of that. We're not really prone to political violence, but it actually gets down to our views of politics. The reasons that conservatives just do not go out there and riot in the way that leftists frequently go out there and riot is because our conservative view of politics is that sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. There are limits to politics. And it's essentially a humble view of the political order. Whereas for the progressive left, anytime a Republican wins, it is by definition illegitimate, because they know the arc of history, they know the end of history, they know the science of history, and they are supposed to win. They are progressing toward utopia. And if you stand in the way of that, it has to be illegitimate.
And it must be illegitimate because the polls were telling us that Biden was going to win. But let's talk about that for a second. Polls are historically wrong because of the methodology that people use when they execute a poll. It's D plus how many, which means the poll is skewed to many more Democrats being polled. The other one is, I will tell you this, unequivocally in 2016 and in 2020, people were afraid to say they were voting for Donald Trump or supporting Donald Trump because the left has painted Trump as such a racist, such a misogynist, such a xenophobe that if you support someone like that, you must be the same. So if someone picks up the phone and says, who are you going to vote for? I'm not going to vote. Or, Biden. A very different thing happens when you get in the voting booth.
That's right. You can only rely on the polls and the models when you're in relatively normal times, right? Because modeling is taking the past and predicting the future. I got to tell you, this year is not normal times. We've got a crazy virus. We've got universal widespread mail-in ballots. We've got murder hornets, for goodness sakes. There is nothing normal about 2020. And so perhaps some of the polls will be accurate, but I just think you can't rely on those. And we've also seen evidence that they're oversampling Democrats, and they're trying to suppress the conservative vote, because there are 2 kinds of elections. There are persuasive persuasion elections, where you try to win over the middle, and there's turn out the vote elections, where you try to get your base to come out. This one is emphatically the latter. People have had their opinions about Trump since the 80s. There are very few undecideds, so it's all about which side can bring out more voters.
I will just give you two quick examples. Be cautioned, because Drudge this week had one of their headlines, Trump 4% chance of winning. I do remember New York Times going into election night, 92% chance. 92% chance Hillary Clinton was going to win that, up until maybe even 7 or 8 o'clock at night. That they had a meter is all the way over, basically pegged that Hillary Clinton. It just started to go like this through the night. Michael Knowles, always good to have you back on again. Michael Knowles Show and The Verdict with Ted Cruz. Thank you so much.
Good to see you, Eric.